Florida Gators basketball team is going dancing in the 2025 NCAA Tournament, getting a 1 seed in the West Regional after winning the 2025 SEC Tournament over the Tennessee Vols. The draw, the seeding, the breakdown, how far can Florida go? The West Regional preview. We'll scout opponents, specifically the first weekend opponents, make a few projections today on the In All Kinds of Weather Forecast. And welcome back to the In All Kinds of Weather Forecast. I am your host, Neil Schulman. Follow me at All Kinds Weather on Instagram and on Twitter. Before we go any further, please like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review on Apple Podcasts. All that good stuff helps us bring you more great Gators content. Also need to take a moment to shout out our sponsor, 401k Generation, the wealth management company that helps you invest today for your future tomorrow. Their team of advisors is committed to providing guidance and education for your 401k plan and its participants, and they also offer a range of enrollment solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your company's 401k plan. Whether it is savings for your child's college, investment advice, or even your retirement, 401k Generation's team of advisors makes getting to know you their top priority. Their advisors will tailor a path to assist you in navigating life's financial milestones and reaching your financial goals. That is 401k Generation, building stronger futures one generation at a time. For more information, contact them at 866-998-5879 or visit their website at 401kgeneration.com. So, here we go. NCAA Tournament time is upon us. The Gators return to the big dance for the second year in a row after a very, very disappointing loss to Colorado last season in the round of 64 in Indianapolis. In hindsight, now that loss it was a tough pill to swallow, but also feels like a lot of what is fueling the Gators this year. It certainly did fuel, at least in part, the decision for some of the players to come back for another season at Florida. Guys like Walter Clayton and Will Richard could have gone pro. They did not do so because they were hungry for success at the Florida Gators level. And I mean, NIL is kind of a given nowadays. So you could say that. But in any case, because of that hunger that Florida had coming into the season, the Gators were able to run off a 30-4 record this season prior to Selection Sunday. That was good for second in the SEC. They won the SEC tournament, which, no, that is not the true SEC championship. The SEC does acknowledge the regular season champ as the official champ, quote unquote. That's what goes in the record books as the official champion. So not the ultimate title to play for sure. Not even the ultimate title within the SEC, but it's a title. It's a championship. It's a trophy. It's a piece of history. It is an accomplishment. You get shirts, you get hats, you get a trophy, and not just like the made up ones that, Central Florida Golden Knights kind of do whenever they win a bowl game. It's an actual one that goes down in the history books with about, let's say, 70 years or so of history before this one. So it's definitely something to feel good about nonetheless. But the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee clearly does not care for it. They clearly don't think it matters because they gave Florida the fourth and last number 1 regional seed. And now, as a punishment for being number 4 overall and not higher, the Florida Gators are going to have to play for a regional title in California. They are shipped out to the West in San Francisco, which pretty clearly continues the pattern of the committee not caring one bit about conference tournaments. The brackets were pretty clearly put together well before conference tournaments even started. I'd even argue personally that they were put together a week or two before the conference tournaments even started, and then were only just modified here and there to account for some auto bids and maybe a bubble move here or there. But I mean, 2 or 3 weeks ago was about the time at which the Auburn Tigers seemed like the clear-cut number 1 overall seed. Yeah, Florida beat them head-to-head in Auburn, but Auburn's body of work did objectively seem better than Florida's as the calendar flipped from February to March. In fact, it seemed better than everyone else's. I mean, frankly, they seem like the best team in the country by a good margin towards the end of February. But when that calendar flipped, Florida did have the head-to-head. They were lurking a little behind Auburn between about 3 to 6 in the net and Ken Palm ratings and Evan Maya rankings and Bart Torvik ratings for most of the year, but it did truly seem like Auburn was the best team. But as that calendar flipped from February to March, And Florida beat Texas A&M, now a 4 seed in the South. Beat Alabama on the road, now a 2 seed in the East. Mississippi, now the 6 seed in the East. Missouri, the 6th seed in the West, beat Alabama again, this time by 20 points. And then beat Tennessee, the number 2 seed in the Midwest, to finish off the SEC tournament run. And while Florida was busy doing that, as they were busy ripping off a 6-game winning streak to close out the year all over NCAA tournament teams, Auburn lost 3 out of its next 4 games. Something doesn't quite seem right there. They get the number 1 overall seed, and Florida stays at number 4, which, by the way, was exactly where they were when the committee teased its, I don't even know what you call it, it's the bracket reveal, the top 16 teaser that they do in early February. Whatever you want to call that, that's exactly where the teams were. 1, 2, 3, 4 were exactly the same. Auburn 1, Duke 2, Houston 3, Florida 4. Nothing changed there. The Gators' 6-game winning streak all over NCAA tournament teams, nor the Auburn Tigers collapse at the end of the year. Granted, they did lose to very good opponents, but still, losing 3 out of 4 games to finish the year clearly is not ideal. I would argue that should have been something that knocks them off the number 1 overall seed line. The net rankings, which the NCAA Tournament Committee supposedly does use very heavily, even that metric dropped them off number 1 overall. They fell to number 2, and Duke overtook them at number 1. But anyway, it is what it is. The conference tournament trophy clearly does not matter to the committee. It's still a trophy. It's still something to play for. It's nice to win it. As far as the NCAA tournament is concerned, as far as seeding in the tournament is concerned, as far as your resume for that tournament goes, it's meaningless. We saw that last year. We saw it again this year. We're going to move forward knowing that, and that doesn't mean we don't try. You know, I had some people come at me on Twitter because I apparently seem to suggest that, and I want to just clear the air about that. No, I did not say that. I did not say Florida should just tank and lose the first game. I didn't say that. I said if you do lose early in the tournament, or anyone in the tournament, it doesn't really matter that much because there's a much bigger prize that awaits you in the coming weeks. That was my point. That point still holds. I absolutely stand by that take. The NCAA Tournament Selection Committee just reproved that again. But with that said, yes, it is annoying to know that what you do in the final 2 or 3 weeks of the period during which you're supposedly being judged on your merit doesn't actually count for anything in the eyes of the people who determine your fate. But Florida, just like 63 of the 67 teams that heard their names called Sunday night, that's everyone in the field minus the first 4, now sits 6 wins away from a national title. And we know the Gators' path. And it is a path that is littered with history for the Florida Gators. Historical matchups, I don't know if you want to call them rivalries, but the Gators have absolutely seen quite a bit of the teams that they're probably going to have to get through in order to get back to the Final Four for the 6th time in school history. At least the Gators have historically seen these teams in a lot of cases. And let's start right off the bat with Norfolk State, the round of 64 opponent. And I hate this one. I hate that Florida has to play an HBCU school. I really, really wish they played anyone else. I talk a lot on this show about my very close friendship, almost really family-like relationship I have with a former Gator player who transferred to an HBCU school. And just going there, even for the first time, I could see that they do an amazing job in providing education and resources to people who otherwise probably aren't going to get a chance to go to college. And I'm not going to go too deep into U.S. history now, but long story short, there was a time in which we didn't treat everyone equally in this country. Frankly, I mean, these historically black schools have been around since slavery was a thing and the immediate post-slavery segregation days. They were actually created as tools during the days of segregation where there were still signs in public places for, whites only and colored only, like fountains and bathrooms and stuff like that. And it was about a lot more than just water fountains back then, too, because a lot of black people back then were rejected from schools simply because they were black. I mean, imagine a school doing that in 2025. But there was a time in America's history where apparently we thought that was acceptable. So, in any case, HBCUs were created to help right that wrong, and they still exist today pretty much to serve the same purpose, which is to provide underprivileged people, specifically minorities, the chance to get a college degree when they may not otherwise be able to do so. And that's really cool. Like, that's just objectively a really cool thing to see. And going to the HBCU school, which my friend attended, and just seeing the way that they shower their athletes with genuine love in a lot of cases, because most of them are not going to play professional football or basketball or whatever sport they went to the school to play at. They're just loved anyway because of who they are, because they want to, because the people around them, the community wants to empower them all to be the best human beings after college that they can be. And that's a common, I guess, canned answer you can probably hear sometime, or you can just throw into a chat bot, or like on Twitter, you can just use Grok or use Nova AI or whatever your AI source is. You could just probably get something like that as a response. But I mean, having been to a campus and seeing that for myself is really special. So with that said, I hate that Florida has to play a kind of school like that, because I do generally root for HBCUs, and I think that they're one of the few pure and genuinely good things about this world right now. But anyway, when you line up to play against the Florida Gators, you are the enemy that day. So I don't like that it has to be that way, but that is the way it is. And it's a familiar enemy at that for the Florida Gators, at least in terms of HBCU schools that Florida's played, because Florida played them in Omaha in the round of 32 in 2012, crushing them 84-50. Norfolk State got to that game by shocking number 2 seed Missouri in the first round. Zach O'Quinn was the toast of the town for a day. They could not replicate that feat in the second game. Florida blew them away by 34 points. And if Vegas knows anything, which they usually do, that's probably what's going to happen on Friday night. Game is set to go at 6:50 p.m. on TNT for those of you who are not able to make it to Raleigh, North Carolina. Fun fact, I will be. So it'll be my first time seeing the Gators in the NCAA Tournament since the 2017 regional in New York City, where I'm from. But yeah, 28.5 points Florida Gators are favored by. That's a lot of points. That is the most any team is favored to win any first-round game by as of this recording. Of course, the lines could still fluctuate. They could move between now and tip-off on Thursday and Friday. And also, Auburn and Duke still don't know who they're playing yet in their first-round game. But that's kind of what you expect in a 1/16 matchup. So we won't waste a ton of time on that. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that Florida does what it's supposed to do. They beat a team that does not recruit from anywhere near the pool of talent that they do, and they beat Norfolk State again in Raleigh to get to Sunday. And so we'll spend the rest of the show talking about the two possible round of 32 opponents, Connecticut and Oklahoma. And there is a lot deeper of a history with both of those schools. And in one case, it spans across multiple sports. UConn, as we know, there is a bit of it's a brief history, but it's a pretty devastating one. And I think that kind of goes on both sides, because with UConn, the history started in 1994. The Gators under Lon Kruger ripped UConn's souls out with a 69-60 victory in the Sweet 16. After the game went to overtime, Florida just absolutely dominated and ran away with it, and UConn never knew it hit them. Went on to the Elite Eight, would go on to win that as well to go to the Final Four. 20 years later, UConn would return the favor in particularly gut-wrenching fashion, ruining Florida's special dreams from that 2014 team with a victory in the national semifinals on their way to their fourth at the time national title. I'll never feel good about a 16-4 lead ever again. That was, still some PTSD from that. And again, like I said, UConn would win the title that year under head coach Kevin Ollie, led by players Shabazz Napier, Niles Gaffey, and Ryan Boatwright. And of course, UConn has been the dominant superpower in college basketball pretty much since the last time Florida won it in 2007 when the Gators won back-to-back titles. Since then, UConn's dominated the sport. UConn, of course, has won the last two national titles, Also won that 2014 title, just mentioned a second ago. Also won it 3 years before that in 2011 as well. And college basketball's postseason setup, I would say, I think makes it kind of hard for there to be a basketball version of Alabama football under Nick Saban. And they're also completely different sports. But in terms of pure dominance, UConn's probably the closest to it over the last quarter century. They've won 6 national titles since 1999. They've won 4 titles since 2011. And of course, they won the last 2. So this is the premier program right now in college basketball. But they are having a down year. They're having a very down year, at least compared to the last 2, for sure. None of that history is going to help them this year, where they're a severely weakened version of the dominant juggernaut that we saw the last 2 seasons. They did kind of get hot at the end of the season. They did win 5 straight before losing in the Big East tourney. They swept Marquette this year somehow. Also beat Creighton on the road. Got a handful of other low-level NCAA tournament team victories in there, like Texas, Baylor, and Gonzaga. But they did get swept by St. John's, and they don't have a single win over a team that has a 6 seed or higher in the NCAA tournament. So, Gator fans, you got UConn PTSD like I do. You want postseason payback for 2014? This is it. This year, this team, this matchup is where it's going to happen. There's never going to be a better chance, or at least on paper there won't, for Florida and UConn to meet in the NCAA tournament. Not a regular season game, not in the NIT, in a postseason game with actual championship implications on the line, albeit a few rounds before that, but still in the NCAA tournament, and the Gators be in position to as dominantly destroy the UConn Huskies as we're going to see in this game, should it come to pass. And, it's the round of 32 and not the Final Four like they did to us in 2014. But, even still, the winner does book its passage to the Sweet 16 in California. That's an accomplishment. And again, it's the NCAA tournament with the same winner-go-home stakes attached. And also, again, we did break their hearts in 1994. So this win combined with that feels like a 2-for-1 score settler for 2014. Now, I was 2 weeks old when that 1994 game happened, but purely from a historical perspective, it does feel like a win in the round of 32 here, combined with that Sweet 16 win 30 years ago, collectively would kind of make up for that 2014 loss to that. Well, that team was special. I don't know. You could make the argument. Let's leave it at that. You could make the argument that Florida has evened the score with those 2 wins. And also for all the regular season losses UConn's handed us through the years. But as they say, nothing is guaranteed. We're not going to Sharpie Florida in to get past them. You never Sharpie anything in March. You got to play the games. And, while I do think Florida got a fairly favorable draw in terms of the teams that it could draw in the later rounds, it's generally speaking a kind of tough 8 seed. UConn is not great by any means. And the advanced metrics back that up. They all say that UConn is exactly the number 35 team in the country. That all the major advanced metric sites. That's Bart Torvik, that's Ken Pomeroy, that's Evan Maya. They all agree that Connecticut is the number 35 team in college basketball. And if you think about it, that's actually pretty low for an 8 seed from a strictly bracketological standpoint. Think about just from the math perspective. 1 seeds should be ranked from 1 to 4. 2 seeds should be ranked from 5 to 8. 3 seeds from 9 to 12, and so on in multiples of 4, or at least until you run out of at-large bids and have to give auto bids to tiny conference winners like the MAAC or the MEAC or the Big Sky, etc. But that said, the Huskies are a few spots lower than that range. The expected range of an 8 seed being 29 to 32. Huskies are outside of that by a few spots, but still, UConn is a little bit dangerous as an 8 seed, albeit for an overseeded one. 2 things scare me about UConn. Specifically, 2 players scare me. That's Liam McNeely, who scored 38 in an upset win at Creighton, and Solo Ball, who scored 25 in an upset win over Marquette. They may have reversed. But those two guys can get hot. They can take over a game. And you just never know when that can happen. And it can happen. It doesn't happen very often against Florida, but it has happened. Florida has had games this year where they just don't defend the perimeter and they let teams catch fire from 3-point land. Most recent example, Georgia. Of course, part of that also is when another team is going to shoot 78% from three over the course of an entire half, you can't really do much about that because that's a ridiculous anomaly and it's so rare that you just can't prepare for it. But with UConn, there is a chance of that. A small chance, but there is a chance that the guard play is going to somehow elevate itself in the snap of a finger and then stay that way for long enough for UConn to just not miss shots long enough to get a lead and then hold on to it, as Georgia did, as Missouri did over Florida. But unfortunately for UConn, they don't get enough performances like that, or at least they don't get long enough stretches like that from their guards. Not for a full game. You know, they can do it for 4, 5, 6, 7-minute segments. Can't do it for 40. And this time, there's no Donovan Kling in there at the 5 position to just suck down boards and clean up the misses for putbacks. In fact, the only starter that comes back from last year's team, the only returning starter from last year is Alex Karaman. And, you know, he's been fine this year. He's been decent for them. 14.4 points a game, 5.9 rebounds a game, decent stats. Also has not been out of this world spectacular either. And it feels like that's kind of what you need to get from your front court if you're going to beat Florida on the glass. And UConn does not have that. And even worse for them, they have a turnover problem. The Huskies turn the ball over a lot. 11.2 times a game. That is 127th in the NCAA. And that is a bad trait to carry into any NCAA tournament game. But this Florida team is particularly deadly in transition. The Gators can turn defense into offense at any moment. Elijah Martin, as we've seen, is no less recently than the SEC tournament championship game, is a spectacular on-ball defender. The instincts that he has are tremendous. The hand just flicks out like that out of nowhere. Ball's poked away. Ball's loose. Gators in transition. 3-on-1. Team doesn't know what hit you. Points on the board. Easy as that. Will Richard, different type of defender. I'd say he's probably better as an off-ball defender. He can just shed screens, get around them, and just blow up set plays better than a lot of guys I've seen in college basketball this year. And then in transition, I mean, Walter Clayton is just filthy overall. He's a first-team All-American. I don't need to say much more than that. He's an elite basketball player. Will Richard could always shoot from the outside. This year, he's also learned how to drive, finish at the rim. And the way Florida's big guys just run the floor, too. And Alex Condon and Thomas Houck are probably best known and most appreciated because of all the big boards that they pull down and second chance opportunities they can give the offense. But the way that they just sprint down the court sets up such great opportunities, and not the least of which comes in the form of their rebounding ability. Let's say, you have a 3-on-1 and you miss. Oh no, are you serious? We hit a 3-on-1 and we couldn't convert that into points? Oh wait, never mind. There's Thomas Houck. There's the board. There's the putback. Who cares? Points. First shot, second shot, third shot, who cares? They all count the same. That's the kind of magic eraser that those guys can provide when the shot does not go down. And especially when the other team that just turned it over is now having to sprint back the court just to get their hands up to alter shots, much less to even get an adequate guarding position. Huge benefit for Florida and a massive disadvantage for UConn in this game should it come to pass. So, again, could UConn win? Yes, they could. Solo Ball or Liam McNeely or Hassan Diarra could get red hot and take over the course of a game. I don't think it's likely because those turnover problems the Huskies have really do not bode well for them against Florida. If they beat Oklahoma and then they cannot value the basketball on Sunday night against Florida, this could be one of those ugly scores where Florida wins by 20 or 30. Well, I mean, it'd be ugly for UConn fans anyway, and just neutral fans who want to see competitive games. Beautiful score for us Gators is like I alluded to, we owe them a little something something from 2014. But again, as I was just saying, there is no guarantee that any matchup comes to fruition because first UConn has to get by Oklahoma. And the Sooners are a fascinating case study of the discrepancy of what happens when you play SEC opponents versus what happens when you play anybody else. Sooners were 13-0 against teams outside the SEC this year. They were 7-13 against SEC opponents. Some good wins in the non-conference slate too. Beat Arizona, beat Michigan, beat Louisville. All three of those teams are going dancing. None of them are being talked about as national title level good, but I mean, they're all expected to win their first round games, at least based on their seedings and the early point spreads. Then the Sooners get to SEC play. They promptly get welcomed to the league with a 28-point blowout loss to Alabama, and it just gets worse and worse and worse from there. They did somehow manage to recover at the very end of the season and salvage their NCAA tournament hopes by winning their last two SEC games to finish 6-12 in the league, won their first SEC tournament game, hilariously, over mid-major Mike, lost their second, and that brought them to the 9 line of the SEC tournament, which is a bit inflated. If you ask, don't ask me. Again, if you ask the advanced metrics people who know more than me about this, they're obscenely overseeded. The net rankings have them at 43, which is very low for an at-large selection at all, let alone an at-large selection that clears the first 4 and gets a 9 seed. Other advanced metric systems also agree that they're a very weak team for a 9 seed. Bart Torvik, for example, has them as number 46. Evan Maya has them at number 47. That's NIT territory, really. I mean, the low or I guess the high 40s, the 40 to 42, 43 range is where you're looking at for that last 4, generally speaking. Some exceptions, but that's generally the range for the first 4. 45 or lower, you're not making it. 44, you kind of 43, you're kind of nervous on Selection Sunday, or at least you're supposed to be if you're going to take the rankings that these advanced metric systems churn out and use them to kind of project where they're going to be seated. Yeah, there's a mismatch there. 46 in Bart Torvik. Evan Maya has them at 47. Ken Palm a little bit more favorable for them, having them at 38, but still, that's even outside the range for a 9 seed. So that's an extremely weak profile for a 9 seed, which is part of why I feel like UConn's probably going to beat them. Oklahoma also somehow turns it over even more than UConn does, 12.1 times per game to UConn's 11.2 times per game, although got to mention, again, they did face much better competition playing in the SEC, which sent 14 teams dancing versus UConn did in the Big East, which only sent 5. So, I mean, that's kind of why I didn't lead with that stat. I gave the Sooners a little bit of grace there for that number because they do play significantly better competition this year. But the Sooners also have plenty of weaknesses aside from that. So, if they do somehow get past UConn, there's going to be a much bigger, stronger, and faster Florida team, and just better Florida team waiting for them in the round of 32. It's a Florida team that already crushed them by 22 points in February. It could have been a lot worse than that, really. And the Gators, which you got to assume they will easily handle Norfolk State. I want to say again, you cannot assume anything, but I think it's generally agreed upon that Florida should win that game comfortably. Gators will be a little bit more rested than Oklahoma, which presumably will have to have exerted a lot more energy taking down a congruent team in the UConn Huskies. So we're taking this one weekend at a time. We're focusing just on this weekend, not looking ahead to next weekend. But I will say moving forward, if the Gators do get out of Raleigh alive, it does appear to be a fairly easy draw in terms of the difficulty levels of the opponents. I definitely do not like the geography of it. But again, as far as the opponents are concerned, the matchups seem favorable. St. John's as the 2 seed does not scare me in the slightest bit. They cannot shoot. They're actually the lowest rated 2 seed according to that. They're number 8 overall. Texas Tech, potentially problematic with the way that they can score points in bunches. But I mean, if I were them, I'd be more worried about Missouri than looking ahead to anything next weekend. A Missouri team that already beat Florida once this year, by the way. Of course, the Gators did get their payback in the SEC tournament, but nonetheless, that did happen. And it's a data point that we have to at least somewhat weigh as a case study of what happens when the Gators take a nap for the first half. I will say, I think someone on the committee has a very sick mind that they put Bill Self, John Calipari, and Rick Pitino all together in the same pot in Providence, Rhode Island. Only one of them is going to make it out of there alive. But, I mean, this is the weakest Kansas team in probably 15, 20 years. And Calipari's team at Arkansas, they won at Rupp. Some of the data says the body of work, right? We're going to use the whole body of work phrase that Auburn fans love to justify the number one ranking. Yeah, body of work. It doesn't say that the Hogs are that scary either. Florida also beat them, of course, in Bud Walton earlier this season. So, again, anything can happen. This event is known for its upsets. In fact, I'd even say it's defined by them. So I'm not calling my shot quite yet. I'm not going to give you the soundbite that says the Florida Gators win the national championship like Scooter Magruder does. But I do think that this is as favorable a path as Florida could hope for to get to the Final Four. And assuming the Gators hold serve in Raleigh, we will talk about that regional weekend in San Francisco when it comes to pass. But for now, that is our show. Please be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review on Apple Podcasts. We always appreciate that. Final thing to end the show, a bit of a bittersweet moment in all kinds of weather forecast history. Our host, Chris Yanes, is stepping aside. He's going to become a father. And, that's awesome. He's continuing on the progression of his life, moving forward, taking steps to further himself in his life's journey. He's also taking a larger role at work. I tend to think that either one of those two things by themselves, and he would have been able to continue pumping out some content for us, but the two of them combined, no, not the combination of them. So for the foreseeable future, he will not be on these shows. He's always welcome back. If he's ever going to have the time, he's always welcome to just jump on a show. So he didn't leave. I know some people in the comments saying, "Oh, Neil fired Chris." No, I didn't. I didn't. He's moving on in his life to become a father and to take larger responsibility at his work. And we wish him all the best. And you'll probably be seeing him again someday on all kinds of other forecasts. But for now, it is just going to be yours truly riding solo, maybe looking to bring on someone else to host the show for the foreseeable future. But for right now, it is just myself, and I'll be doing what I can to bring you guys the best content I can about the Florida Gators. So until next time, in all kinds of weather, we'll all sit together for FLORIDA. Go Gators. If you're going to Raleigh, I'll see you there. And let's get ourselves a trip to the Sweet 16.